Everybody get out of the car, now! Greenfeild Academy looked like the kind of school you'd see in a movie. The gates were huge, the lawns were so neat they looked fake, and the buildings sparkled in the sunlight. It was the school rich people sent their kids to, where every parent believed their child's future was being secured. You would marvel when you see how wealthy parents boast about their kids attending Greenfeild, like they were already in heaven. For Toby Ajayi, getting into Greenfeild was a big deal. His parents were proud, especially his father, Pastor Kayode. Toby was their only son, and this was their way of giving him the best. As their car rolled through the gates, Toby stared out the window, clutching the small Bible his dad had given him earlier that morning. His heart raced. The school looked so big, so serious, and Toby felt small. Toby, his father's voice rang out, firm but kind. This school is full of different kinds of children. Some come from good homes, others don't. You must hold on to your faith, never forget who you are. Yes, Daddy, Toby replied quietly. Pray every night, his mum added with her usual soft smile. God will always guide you. Toby nodded, but he was nervous. He had no idea what to expect inside those shiny walls. Toby's dormitory, Emerald House, was a giant building with rows of bunk beds and shiny lockers. Everything looked clean and organized, nothing like the schools he had seen before. As he unpacked his suitcase, a cheerful boy with bright eyes walked up to him. Hey, new guy, the boy said with a grin. I'm Cunley. What's your name? Toby, he replied shyly. Welcome to Greenfeild, Cunley said. You'll love it here, just be ready, it's not all easy. What do you mean? Toby asked, frowning. Cunley shrugged. You'll see. Just mind your business and don't annoy the seniors. You'll be fine. Toby wasn't sure what to make of that, but Cunley seemed friendly enough. The first week at Greenfeild went smoothly. Toby kept to himself, went to class on time, and avoided trouble. His dorm mates teased him a little, calling him pastor's boy, but it didn't bother him much. He thought the school was perfect, until he started noticing strange things. It started with the whispers. Late at night, when everyone was supposed to be asleep, Toby would hear muffled voices and footsteps in the hallway. At first, he thought he was imagining things, but it happened too often to ignore. Then there were the older boys. During breaks, Toby noticed some seniors sneaking out of the school grounds. When they came back, they smelled of cigarettes and something strange, like alcohol. One afternoon, Toby overheard a conversation that made him pause. Did you hear about Emeka's initiation last night? One boy whispered to another. Yeah, the second boy replied, laughing. That guy almost cried, but he's in now. Big moves coming his way. Toby didn't understand what they meant, but the word initiation sent a chill down his spine. The first time Toby saw something truly disturbing, he was walking to the cafeteria. A group of senior boys had cornered a smaller boy by the wall. Give us your lunch money, one of the seniors demanded, his voice cold and threatening. The smaller boy trembled, tears welling up in his eyes. I don't have any money, he whispered. Don't lie to us, another senior barked, stepping closer. The boy quickly reached into his pocket and handed over a note. The seniors laughed, pocketed the money and walked away, leaving the boy sobbing quietly. Toby clenched his fists. How could something like this happen in a school as prestigious as Greenfeild? That evening, Toby decided to tell someone in authority. He waited outside the staff room and approached the vice principal when he came out. Sir, Toby began, his voice shaky, I need to report something. The vice principal adjusted his glasses and frowned. What is it, young man? Toby told him about the bullying he had seen and the whispers he had overheard. He didn't mention the seniors sneaking out, but he hoped the vice principal would take the rest seriously. The man sighed heavily. Toby, I understand your concern, but you must be careful. Many of the students here come from very powerful families. If you accuse them without proof, it could cause trouble. For you and the school, Toby's heart sank. But sir, isn't it your job to protect us? The vice principal's face hardened. Just focus on your studies and stay out of trouble, Toby. That's my advice to you." Toby was frustrated. How could the staff ignore something so serious? Determined to figure out what was happening, he started paying closer attention. He noticed that some students had expensive gadgets, phones, watches, and even designer clothes that their allowances couldn't possibly cover. They often spoke in hushed tones about runs and deals. Then there were the rumors about cults. Some boys whispered about rituals held late at night in abandoned classrooms. They spoke of blood oaths, strange symbols, and secret initiations. At first, Toby thought it was just gossip, but the more he observed, the more he realized there was some truth to the stories. One evening, as Toby walked back from the library, a group of senior boys surrounded him. Their leader, Sei, was tall and muscular with a smirk that made Toby's skin crawl. "So, you like poking your nose into things that don't concern you, eh?" Sei said, stepping closer. "I don't know what you're talking about," Toby replied, trying to sound calm. Sei grabbed him by the shoulder. "Let me give you some advice, pastor's boy. Mind your business. This school isn't for snitches." The other boys laughed as Toby nodded silently. His heart was pounding, but he didn't dare say a word. A few nights later, Toby was heading back to his dorm when Sei and his gang ambushed him again. This time, they weren't just issuing threats. They attacked. They pushed him against the wall, punched him, and mocked him as he tried to defend himself. "You think your daddy's Bible will save you here?" Sei sneered, landing another punch. By the time they were done, Toby was bruised and aching all over. He limped back to his dorm, his head spinning with pain and confusion. The next morning, Toby sat on his bunk, clutching his Bible tightly. He wanted to tell someone, anyone, but he didn't know who to trust. Kunle, who'd been watching him quietly, sat down beside him. "Toby, are you okay?" Toby shook his head. "I'm fine," he lied, avoiding Kunle's gaze. Kunle didn't push. "If you need to talk, I'm here," he said simply, before walking away. That night, Toby wrote a letter to his parents. He explained everything, the bullying, the threats, and the strange things happening at Greenfeild. But when morning came, he couldn't bring himself to send it. What if they didn't believe him? What if they thought he was being weak? He folded the letter and hid it in his locker, his cry for help left unsent. The end of the term couldn't come fast enough for Toby. When the holidays finally arrived, he was relieved to leave Greenfeild behind, even if only for a while. At home, his parents immediately noticed something was wrong. Toby had lost weight, and the cheerful, talkative boy they knew had grown quiet and withdrawn. "Toby, are you okay?" his mother asked during dinner, her brows knitted in concern. "I'm fine, Mama," Toby replied, forcing a smile and pushing his food around on his plate. But Pastor Kayode wasn't convinced. Later that evening, he called Toby into his study, closing the door behind them. "Toby," he began gently, "I've noticed you've been quiet. Something is bothering you. Talk to me." Toby hesitated, staring at the floor. The weight of everything he'd endured felt too heavy to share. But his father's steady gaze gave him courage. Finally, he spoke. "Daddy, something is wrong at Greenfeild." He told his father everything, about the bullying, the threats, and the whispers of cults and scams. He explained how the staff seemed unwilling to intervene and how powerless he felt. By the time Toby finished, tears were streaming down his face. Pastor Kayode's expression darkened, his jaw clenched in anger. "No one will harm my son and get away with it," he said firmly. "Greenfeild will answer for this." The next morning, the Ajayi family drove to Greenfeild Academy. Pastor Kayode was determined to confront the school's management and demand answers. As they entered the principal's office, Principal Olayemi stood to greet them, his polished smile faltering when he saw the seriousness on Kayode's face. "Pastor Kayode, what a pleasant surprise," Olayemi began. "How can I—" "Save your formalities," Kayode interrupted, slamming his hand on the desk. "Your school has failed my son." The principal's expression turned serious. "Pastor, please, let's discuss this calmly." "There is nothing calm about this," Kayode thundered. "My son has been bullied, threatened, and assaulted while you sit here pretending everything is fine. How dare you call this a safe school?" Toby sat quietly beside his mother, holding her hand tightly. Kayode handed the principal a file containing detailed accounts of what Toby had endured. It included the names of the seniors involved, the incidents he'd witnessed, and descriptions of the suspicious activities on campus. Principal Olayemi skimmed through the documents, his face growing pale. "These are serious accusations," he said finally. "But Pastor, you must understand, many of these students come from powerful families. If we act without proof, it could harm the school's reputation." Kayode's eyes narrowed. "Reputation? You care more about your reputation than the safety of the children under your care? If you refuse to act, I will." The confrontation at Greenfeild left Kayode fuming. That evening, as he returned home from a meeting, he noticed a black car trailing him. He tried to dismiss his suspicion, thinking it might be a coincidence, but as he pulled into his street, the car sped up. Before Kayode could react, the driver rolled down the window and a gunshot rang out. The bullet missed him by inches, shattering the car window instead. Kayode slammed his foot on the accelerator, swerving into his driveway and honking frantically. The assailant sped off into the night, leaving him shaken but unharmed. When he entered the house, his wife and children rushed to him. "Kayode, what happened?" his wife asked, her voice trembling. "They tried to kill me," he said, his voice low but steady. "This is because of Greenfeild." 2 days later, the Ajayi family was preparing to attend church. They loaded into the family car, with Toby sitting in the back seat and his parents up front. Just as Kayode turned the key in the ignition, he noticed something odd. A faint clicking sound coming from beneath the car. His instincts kicked in. "Everybody, get out of the car," he shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. The family scrambled out just moments before a deafening explosion rocked the vehicle. The blast was so strong that it shattered windows in nearby houses and sent flames shooting into the sky. Neighbors rushed out, screaming and shouting in panic. The Ajayi family stood frozen, staring at the burning car in disbelief. "Is everyone okay?" Kayode muttered, his face grim. "This is their doing, they won't go scot-free." Shaken but determined, Kayode realized he needed allies. He began reaching out to other parents, hoping to find those who had experienced similar issues at Greenfeild. Most were hesitant to speak. "Pastor, I sympathize with you," one father said, "but you know how things work here. If I speak out, it could ruin my business." Another parent added, "I've heard rumors, but my daughter hasn't said anything. I can't risk her future." But after days of phone calls, Kayode finally found one parent willing to talk, a woman named Mrs. Daniels. Mrs. Daniels' son, Daniel, had left Greenfeild the year before. "My son was bullied mercilessly," she revealed. "They humiliated him, threatened him, and beat him. I reported it to the school, but nothing changed. I had to transfer him out." Her testimony strengthened Kayode's resolve. Encouraged by her bravery, more parents began to come forward, sharing their own stories of bullying, intimidation, and cult activities at Greenfeild. A few days later, Kayode received an anonymous call. The voice on the other end was shaky, but determined. "Pastor," the caller began, "I'm a teacher at Greenfeild. I've seen things, terrible things, but if I speak out, I'll lose my job." "What have you seen?" Kayode asked, his tone steady. The teacher described a culture of fear and corruption within the school. Certain students, backed by their influential parents, were untouchable. Teachers who tried to discipline them were silenced or fired. "There are secret meetings," the teacher continued, "cult gatherings, even some staff members are involved." "Why haven't you reported this?" Kayode asked, anger boiling in his voice. "I tried," the teacher replied, "but the administration buried it. They told me to keep quiet if I wanted to keep my job." "Will you meet with me?" Kayode asked. "I promise to protect your identity." After a long pause, the teacher agreed. Armed with testimonies from parents, students, and the whistleblower, Kayode contacted a journalist known for exposing corruption. The journalist, intrigued by the story, began investigating Greenfeild Academy. When the article was published, it created a national uproar. The headline, "The Dark Secrets of Greenfeild Academy," spread like wildfire. It detailed everything: bullying, cultism, fraud, and the administration's efforts to cover it up. Social media exploded with outrage. Parents demanded answers, former students shared their stories, and the public called for immediate action. For Toby, watching the news was both terrifying and liberating. His nightmare was finally being exposed, but he couldn't help feeling anxious about what might come next. Greenfeild Academy's reputation began to crumble under the weight of the allegations. Investigators were sent to the school uncovering hidden financial records, evidence of cult activities, and logs of suspicious payments. But the fight wasn't over. The powerful families behind Greenfeild weren't going to back down without a fight. The media frenzy surrounding Greenfeild Academy reached a boiling point. Parents stormed the school gates, demanding answers, while investigators combed through every corner of the institution. What they uncovered was worse than anyone could have imagined. In the hidden parts of the school, investigators found chilling evidence of cult activities. An abandoned playground had been turned into a ritual chamber, with strange symbols carved on walls. Bloodstains, animal remains, and eerie masks were discovered, leaving no doubt about the extent of the cult's influence. Financial records showed suspicious payments to school staff, clearly intended to silence complaints or cover up incidents. Witnesses came forward with tales of late-night rituals, secret meetings, and a hierarchy that protected the most dangerous students. The findings shocked the nation. As the investigation unfolded, the threats against the Ajayi family intensified. Kayode had become the face of the fight against Greenfeild, and those who had benefited from the school's dark secrets weren't happy. One night, as Kayode sat in his study preparing for a press interview, he heard a faint scratching sound outside the window. He moved cautiously, peeking through the curtains, only to see a shadow darting away. Seconds later, a rock smashed through the glass, narrowly missing his head. Attached to it was a note. "Stop now, or next time we won't miss." Kayode refused to back down. "Let them come," he told his wife. "The truth must be told." Under mounting pressure from the media and government, Greenfeild Academy's board of directors announced the school's immediate closure. The gates were locked, the students sent home, and the staff dismissed. For Toby, watching the gates of Greenfeild close on the evening news was surreal. He had dreamed of escaping the school, but now that it was over, he felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. "This isn't just about Greenfeild," Kayode told him. "This is about changing the system. You've been brave, Toby, never forget that." The investigation led to several arrests. 1. Principal Olayemi, who had ignored numerous complaints, was charged with negligence and obstruction of justice. 2. Say and his gang, the senior boys who had terrorized Toby, were expelled. Those of legal age were charged with assault and intimidation, while younger students were sent to juvenile detention centers. 3rd, staff members who had accepted bribes or turned a blind eye to the school's wrongdoings were dismissed and blacklisted from teaching positions. The public was outraged. As the dust settled, a new hero emerged in the fight against Greenfeild, Mrs. Daniels. Unknown to many, Mrs. Daniels had been quietly gathering evidence for years after her son Daniel had been a victim of bullying and cult recruitment at the school. Her son's life had spiraled out of control, and he eventually died from a drug overdose linked to the school's illicit activities. Driven by grief and anger, Mrs. Daniels had infiltrated parent-teacher meetings, secretly recorded conversations, and collected testimonies from other victims. It was her evidence, anonymously shared with Kayode and the journalist, that had finally brought Greenfeild to its knees. "She's the real hero," Kayode told his wife one evening. She turned her pain into action. For Toby, the months following Greenfield's closure were a time of healing. He enrolled in a smaller, more nurturing school where the teachers were attentive and the students kind. Slowly, he began to rebuild his confidence, but the scars of his experience remained. Nightmares of the bullying and threats haunted him, and he struggled to trust others. Therapy sessions helped, but the road to recovery was long. One day, during a group therapy session, Toby met Shadrach, a boy who had also been a victim at Greenfeild. "You're the boy who exposed them," Shadrach said, his voice filled with awe. Toby shook his head. "I didn't do it alone." Together, they began to attend support groups, speaking out about the dangers of bullying and cultism. While the fight against Greenfeild had brought change, it came at a cost. The assassination attempts and constant threats slowly stopped, and everything seemed to return to calm. But one evening, as Kayode walked home from church, he noticed a car following him. He quickened his pace, but the car pulled up beside him. "Pastor," a voice called out. Kayode turned, his heart pounding. Before he could react, a masked man stepped out of the car and fired. The gunshot echoed through the quiet street, and Kayode fell to the ground. His attackers sped off, leaving him bleeding on the pavement. Kayode's death sent shockwaves through the community. His funeral was attended by hundreds, all of whom spoke of his bravery and sacrifice. "Toby," his mother said softly during the service, "your father was a good man. He gave everything to protect you and others like you. Never forget that." Toby nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I won't, Mama." Years later, Toby stood on a stage, addressing a room full of parents, teachers, and students. He was no longer the timid boy who had cowered before bullies. He was a confident young man with a mission. "Greenfeild taught me many things," he said, "but the most important lesson I learned is this. Silence helps the oppressor. Speaking out isn't easy, but it's the only way to create change." The audience erupted in applause. Toby smiled, feeling a sense of peace and purpose. His father's sacrifice hadn't been in vain, and he was determined to carry on his legacy. If you enjoyed our story, please subscribe and share with your friends for more amazing stories to come.